What this legislation does, and what you just heard Ms. Hensler describe, is a standing court order that was in place by Judge Philip Spivey from the Mulgay Circuit. And because of this standing court order, the sheriff in Morgan County was able to take, without a hearing, this young man directly to the Youth Detention Center. And in this case, before I got involved, I spoke directly to the principal at Morgan County Middle School, who informed me that Eli is a good kid, that he did not know this kid was being taken to a youth detention center and that he needed to be in school. I spoke to the resource officer, and the resource officer informed me that at the request of the assistant principal, she had done an investigation, and based on her investigation, she made a decision to arrest this kid without the knowledge of the principal. I spoke directly to the DA. The DA informed me that because of this standing court order, they were well within their rights to take this kid directly to prison. And then at the end of that, I called Judge Spivey and myself and said, why? But what this legislation will do is that it will prevent any judge in the great state of Georgia from ever having any kind of standing court orders that would allow them to take a kid to any kind of youth detention center without a hearing. The other thing that this legislation does is that it changes, and we know how words are up here in the General Assembly, but one word, shall, to may, which gives discretion to the school system, and that's what this legislation is attempting to do. Too many of our school systems is using our judicial system to discipline and punish kids. This legislation attempts to put some common sense back into a zero tolerance policy in an effort to give school systems discretion, and it also gives discretions to our judicial system as well. That knife that Ms. Hensler mentioned was in fact a little small fishing knife. It was a 2.5-inch knife. They live up in the Lake Oconee area, and the legal limit, I may add, was 2 inches. It should also be noted that Eli turned his knife in at 8:24 a.m. But even after that, this school saw fit. And in speaking to the resource officer shared with me, and I asked why. She said, well, this kid went back to class and started bragging. I said, well, if you're going to arrest a kid for bragging, pick all of them up, because that's what kids do when they're in school. And it's certainly my hope that the House would join with me in submitting companion legislation in the General Assembly, because this is absolutely crucial that we start addressing this issue. And if Dr. Garrett was here, he would tell you that in January that he is on a federal commission that is studying this pipeline from alternative schools to prison, not just in Georgia, but in this nation, that he's been asked to join. He would share that with you. So this is an issue that's been recognized by our Justice Department as well. And I'm going to ask my colleague, Representative Williams, who is an educator, if he would just kind of come and share his experiences in the school system, a retired educator, I may add, and then certainly, Marcus, if you have anything to say, I'd like for you to join us as well.
Just listen at the story. It was a nice sound. You know, I'm sure it's true, because you shared with me the story down in Fort Lauderdale during our National Black Caucus of State Legislative Conference. And I just said, no, this can't be the way the story was. And then listening to that, Ms. Hensley, in the story, it just, hopefully that we don't have something like this happen again. This don't need to be here in our great state of Georgia, to have incidents like this happen to our parents and to the kids that we are to be protecting and our future. So certainly I will be and ask my colleagues, other colleagues, to join me in doing companion legislation which makes sense, because actually this do not make sense. And what happened to you, young man, hopefully we don't have that to happen again to anyone, because it's really it really touched me this morning. Having been in education for over 35 years, this is the first time I've heard of something like that. And we hope that this don't happen again.
Thank you. Marcus, anything you want to share?
The Georgia Association of Educators would like to applaud Senator Jones for efforts on this piece of legislation. And while GAE represents the interest of 43,000 public school employees, we understand that those 43,000 help nurture the 1.7 million children that attend Georgia's public schools. Our efforts to support this legislation are to make sure that our children have an opportunity, that they have a chance, that they're able to be competitive and productive in the 21st century. And to that end, the Georgia Association of Educators would like to make sure that our classroom professionals, our public school professionals, are able to partner with parents and with administrators to make sure that children do get that opportunity that they deserve.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Emanuel, excuse me, Senator, does the bill specifically provide that any school child who might be faced with a possibility of being taken to a YDC should at least get a hearing first, or is it that broad?
Existing law has that provision in it already. However, this particular judge was able to circumvent it by having a standing court order out there, which precluded the hearing. This legislation takes that privilege away. And if I can add, I got an email from Judge Spivey who said that he understood that the policy he had in place was not a good one and that he's already made changes and that that court order, that standing court order, is no longer in place. And I certainly applaud Judge Spivey for taking the initiative on his own to do that. And I thank him, and I certainly would like to think that as we move forward that we can continue to get the cooperation of the entire Juvenile Justice Council, who has been supportive of this legislation I've vetted it through, and helping me get it through the General Assembly as quickly as possible.
And so when you said each school system would have its own discretion, how far would that discretion go? I mean, is there a limit to what they would be required to do, or is it going to be totally up to the school system to decide?
Well, the zero tolerance policy is still a very, very formidable policy that educators and school systems can use at the appropriate measure. We should add that if there's any violence in any school system, the policing authorities really don't need a zero tolerance policy. They can make arrests without it. But what this attempts to do is to give the system some discretion to know that they do not have to send these kids directly to prison, to youth detention centers, and that there is an alternative, and there should be in a lot of cases, all too often. And this isn't the only story that I've heard, but this is one that touched my heart, and I've gotten involved in other cases where similar youth have been confronted with the same issues. I represent Henry DeKalb and a little part of Atlanta, and I know in Henry County in alternative schools there are kids that I'm working with, and I do not have permission for their parents to share their story. But it's very, very similar to this young man's story and why they are still not allowed back into the regular school system.